Hey guys, Rob Boehner, producer at LiveX here, and today I've got the DaVinci Resolve Micro Panel from Blackmagic Design. Now, we were really excited to see this come out, especially because the bigger brother, what's now being called as the Advanced Panel by Blackmagic Design for DaVinci, is $30,000. They released the Mini and the Micro Panel. The Mini panel comes in at $3,000, while this tops out just under $1,000. So let's dig into this a little bit today and open it up, see what we got. I personally decided on getting the Micro Panel as opposed to the Mini panel after seeing a couple of early remarks on it. Just in working with other types of panels, the tangents and other things, I decided that having the little LCD screen up front wasn't really that important to an operator like myself. There are a couple of knobs that are missing in this panel as opposed to the Mini panel, most notably RGB. Direct knobs, but you also have control over that in the software itself, so it's not really that important to me. I don't go into those options very much anyway. So this does basically everything I needed to do and keeps it small and compact to be able to throw it in a Pelican and take it on the road anytime we got to do some posts for our live events. Let's get right into it. This is the box. Beautiful marketing packaging as always from Blackmagic. They do a really good job with the DaVinci marketing especially. You gotta love all their model photos of people doing production, so to speak. But anyway, this is it. The panel itself has a really nice build quality. It feels almost like it has kind of more of a metal feel than a plasticky feel, especially, and certainly not like rubbery plasticky, like some of the tangent stuff. Really solid build quality. I'm gonna get it out of the box and get rid of some of this stuff just so we can take a closer look at it and go from there. Here we have a thank you message, and it says to go in and download the latest version of Resolve. That's fine. You do that at blackmagicdesign.com/support, I believe. This is a USB-C to USB 3.0 connector. That's important for people who don't have USB-C connections on their computer yet, so they can plug this directly in to their existing system, workstation that they use Resolve on, and be right off and running right out of the box. That is the only connection to this panel, the USB-C for the Micro. Now the Mini panel also includes an Ethernet connection and a 4-pin XLR connection for power. Mostly that's because it has the extra LCD panel. It needs a little more power than what the USB-C can offer, and some people really like that they can network that into their system, especially if they're dealing in more of a post house color grading facility that has a SAN network already in place, where none of the machines are physically in the color grading suite themselves. They are kept in a server room, nice and cool, air conditioned and whatever, and then all of the workstation is KVM'd back to where they're working. So enough about that. We're gonna get into the panel itself. What you see right off the bat are these 3 wheels. Anyone who's dealt in color grading before should be familiar with these wheels and the trackballs. Basically, these trackballs are lift, gamma, and gain. These affect color inside of the lift, gamma, and gain. You can toggle log mode on with this button right here. Log would then effectively turn these into shadows, mids, and highlights. Just a little bit different way of grading, whereas most of the time to get a rough general look, we're looking at primaries with the RGB values in the lift, gamma, gain primaries, either with bars or wheels. So most of the time your focus is going to be on the interface itself on DaVinci Resolve, and so you want to make sure that this panel becomes like second nature to you if this is something that you do on a regular basis. I find everything to be exactly where I want it to be. You know, anyone who's worked on a panel before this configuration is going to be very familiar to you right out of the gate. Has very good responsiveness. You know, they feel a little more solid, I would say, than the removable trackballs that come in some of the tangent, and definitely more solid than the TK panel, even though the TK tangent does have a few more options on the board and it works with third-party apps. So that's another thing I should mention right off the bat. The new panels from DaVinci Resolve only work with DaVinci Resolve. So some people like to use their tangent products in Capture One if they're also working on photography and print assets and stuff like that. I know the tangent interfaces with Capture One pretty well, but the DaVinci panels only work with DaVinci. There are some hacks out there you can go into. Maybe somebody will come out with a hack to get this to work with like Lightroom or Capture One itself, but as far as we know, nothing currently works with any other third-party application with these panels. But that's okay because, you know, for most of you, working in Resolve is your primary color grading suite. Some people would like to use this inside of Adobe proper, especially if you're on a time crunch, but you won't be able to do that with this. It's small enough to fit on the table so that you can have a Mac keyboard, which is exactly the same width as this board. So if you do need to go in and like rename nodes or anything like that, you can do that right from the keyboard that you would lay in front of this device. Right off the bat, you'll notice these buttons right above each wheel. It's a little curious to me. I know these are essential in the color grading process, but I don't think they're all that important. These are reset buttons. So you can reset the RGB, you can reset all, or you can reset the level. You know, most of the time, just for those of you who don't know, we're affecting the RGB as we move the trackball around. We're affecting the level, or amplitude as it's often called, of the lift gamma gain as we move the wheels. So these will reset those. You know, I'm not sure if we really needed to take up more space. You know, we could have used some buttons for some other things rather than the reset buttons, because typically if I go down a bad path, I'm probably just deleting that node and adding a new one. One thing that's different about DaVinci Resolve is some of the other color programs, and certainly some of the color grading that you can do inside of Lumetri, inside of Premiere, is that Resolve is a YRGB scale. So it's RGB, which is color, like everyone is familiar with, but then there's also the Y scale, which is the Luma channel. So it allows you to affect the Luma channel without affecting the RGB. There is a little bit of perceptual saturation as you're moving levels around, but it's nice to be able to affect the Y channel separately. And that's what these buttons are here at the top. Top left, we have Y lift, gamma, and gain. That allows you to affect without affecting the RGB, affecting the levels. And then in the middle, right dead in the middle, we have contrast, pivot, and mid-detail. These are used a lot as you go through especially your initial nodes and your node tree of just trying to get, you know, exposure levels right and getting the right level of contrast into your image before you really start to create your look, per se, of color. So color boost is something that may be a little foreign to people who aren't familiar with DaVinci Resolve, but essentially it kind of acts like Vibrance in Lightroom, if anyone's ever worked with that. It increases the color vibrance without affecting saturation too much, so it allows your image to get more color in it without becoming oversaturated. You obviously, you know, have to salt to taste, so to speak, with color boost. It's not like you can just crank this forever and end up with a good result that's not too oversaturated. So be careful about that. One thing I should mention about the sensitivity of all of these buttons is that inside of DaVinci Resolve, you can go into the panel settings and you can customize them to suit your particular feeling for the panels. So you can have it so the smallest bit of move on a trackball makes a big difference, or you can have it so you have to literally like spin the ball a bunch of times to get the petapoints to move on the scale. Back to the knobs on top. We have shadows and highlights. These are, you know, used quite a bit. I don't use them quite as much. I more tend to rely on lift gamma gain. It's generally a good idea, especially for people just starting out with Resolve, to keep it as simple as possible and just make the grade look right and don't get too crazy by using all of the features included in DaVinci Resolve, because that can get a little bit overkill, and you end up with a lot of these projects that you see out there on Vimeo and other places where they're just really overkill with the amount of color that's been put into them. So keep it simple when just starting out until you feel like you have a good understanding of how to make the image look right, and then you can go into being more creative and applying a more creative look. Lastly, on the top right side, we have the saturation, hue, and Luma mix options. These are something that you'll also use quite a bit. So I'm glad that really everything that I use when I would sit down at a DaVinci session would be, mapped across the top here, as well as, I'm relying heavily on the trackballs and just not really looking down at all, which is another reason why we decided to get the micro panel instead of the mini panel, was because I don't really want to be looking at an LCD screen up here for very much. I want to keep my focus on the image as much as possible and let everything down here be kind of second nature. So with that being said, we do have some options over here to the right that allow you to keep moving without having to go back to the mouse or the keyboard, and speed up your workflows, because anybody who's graded a project, especially longer term projects, know that you can get bogged down pretty quickly if you have to keep going back to the mouse or the keyboard to move things along. So let's start at the bottom, because these are a little more complex here at the top. This is very simple here at the bottom. These are transport methods that we have here: next clip, previous clip, next frame, previous frame, next node, previous node, all very important to use. And it's very logical actually how it goes down. So you're in nodes inside of a clip, you're looking at one frame. Let me go to the next frame to see if that matches. A lot of times when you go to a new clip, you'll be at the first frame of that clip, and you'll want to go back just one frame so you can see how the previous frame looked compared to your new clip's frame. Next clip and previous clip, when you're done with the grade for that clip and you want to move on. Obviously play, rewind, and stop are all right there as well. Now let's go into this little bit. It has the grab still feature, which I'm constantly using. Anybody who's not familiar with this, when you create a grade with a complex node tree of all sorts of things and you want to use that on other shots in the sequence, maybe you have the same shot that's cut back to one or two clips away, then you're always going to want to grab that still. And it's also good to have different versions of color grades to show clients. So you can say, oh, with this clip, I was thinking maybe going this way or maybe going that way, especially if you prepared something before the client comes and takes a look at it. You want to have options. So stills are like looks that you save that can also allow you to apply that look and create a 3D LUT from it. So stills are kind of very important to the whole DaVinci environment. You have play still just to see how that still will look. Loop to loop your image. So a lot of times if you're creating a key or a tracking window, power window, you're going to want to loop that to see how it tracks over and over again to make sure that no weird things pop up. You have bypass, which is the bypass nodes, and then you have disable, which turns off the current node you're on. Previous mem, I don't know really how useful that button is going to be to you. Obviously, reset is useful, but the undo and redo I would find myself using all the time. Really everything that I'm trying to do is contained inside of this panel. There are a couple of things, a couple of options in there, creating windows, keying, color balance panel that is not included on here. The color balance is included on the mini panel, but again, it's just not something that I go into very often. Generally, the footage that I've worked on is shot pretty well and it's not too far out of whack. Some of you people who work on reality shows, or maybe indie commercials or something like that may use that more, and you may want to upgrade to the larger panel. But one of the biggest disappointments that I saw with the mini panel was that the LCD display up front currently only has the GUI for the controls. Lastly, I didn't touch on these two buttons. We have the offset and the viewer. The offset button allows you to toggle on and off the offset which allows you to raise and lower an image entirely. It's very straightforward if you look at it, but it's a little bit difficult to explain without showing you in the interface. The viewer button is really handy. I'm so glad they included a viewer on this, because this allows you to toggle between full screen and not full screen. And that can be really helpful, especially in a client session where you have somebody over your shoulder and they want to get a bigger view of how it all looks. So that being said, that's pretty much all the features that you get here on the DaVinci Resolve Micro Panel. I think it's a great offering at an insane price point of $995, where you would pay as much or more for any of the sort of knockoff panel solutions that have come out. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Tangent and like Avid Artist will do to sort of combat this and try to one-up them. I think the biggest opportunity for growth, continued growth in those other panels, is their ability to work across multiple platforms. So like the Eclipse or the Avid Artist will allow you to work directly inside of Avid, which is very handy for editors who work on Avid systems. Also, Baselight has a plugin for Avid, and that also would really help out. Being limited to Resolve may be an issue for some of you. And for those of you, I will say one quick thing before I go, that the mini panel has a couple of more options for editing. So if you are the type of editor, post-production person who uses DaVinci Resolve for editing, which they've been touting for a couple of years now, it's steadily improved. Now I could see myself possibly editing a project inside of DaVinci Resolve from start to finish. If that is something that you do on a regular basis, then you might want to spend a couple more grand and get the mini panel. Me personally, and for the rest of us here at LiveX, we don't edit inside of DaVinci Resolve. So I think that the micro panel is the best bang for your buck, and certainly doesn't hurt the pocketbook at the sub $1,000 price point. Once again, that's the DaVinci Resolve Micro Panel from Blackmagic Design. I'm Rob Baynard. This has been another unboxing. If you like this video, hit subscribe. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at LiveX Production. We really appreciate that, and we appreciate all the support that we've been getting from you guys out there. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.